Good evening. I'm Donna Bartlett May with the League of Women Voters of San Diego, and I will be your moderator for this virtual candidate forum for office of the San Diego County Sheriff. The League of Women Voters of San Diego and the League of Women Voters of North County, San Diego are the co-hosts for this event. The League is proud to be nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties, but always working on vital issues of concern to members and the public. Our Voters Edge website is your online resource for more information about the candidates, ballot issues, and detailed voting information. All candidates for local offices have been invited to include their information at no cost, and I have asked tonight's candidates to do so. You'll find a link in the chat. The League moderates candidate forums using a format that is fair and balanced, yet informative. We have asked the candidates to keep to the issues of the position rather than personal attacks because our goal is for the voters to be able to learn more about candidates than they get from campaign ads and social media. We are recording this forum and it will be available unedited from beginning to end on our website, lwvsandiego.org. We ask attendees to submit questions online before the forum, but you may also submit questions using the link provided in the chat box. Please remember to use civility and respect and address your questions so that all candidates can answer them. The questions will be organized to ensure topics of the greatest interest are asked. Assisting tonight as League question screeners are Jane Andrews and Jeannie Brown from the League of Women Voters of San Diego, and Alyssa Presti, from the League of Women Voters, North County, San Diego. The timekeeper is League member Vicki Riggs. We plan to adjourn by 8:30. Candidates will have 2 minutes for their opening statement and 2 minutes for their closing statements and 1 minute to respond to each question from the audience. We will alternate who answers first. We have 4 candidates with us tonight: Charles Battle, John Gunderson, Kellyanne Martinez, and Dave Myers. John Hemmerling could not be with us tonight due to a conflict, but has submitted a written statement. The other candidates either did not respond to the invitation to this event or did not submit a written statement. The candidates with us tonight will now give opening statements, and then I will read Mr. Hemmerling's statement. Mr. Battle, please read yours.
Stand by, I'm having technical difficulties here.
Do you want me to go on to Mr. Gunderson while you find yours?
Yes, please.
Mr. Gunderson.
Thank you, Donna. And thank you to the League of Women Voters for inviting me to this evening's forum. It's an honor. You know, I distinctly recall reading a local news article a couple of years ago about sheriff's deputies issuing 22 citations to folks who were doing nothing more than sitting in their cars watching the sunset. This at a time when masks were not yet required, and people could gather in the hundreds inside Costco's and Walmart's. But there we were, criminalizing folks for sitting together with their families in their cars, while protesters and rioters were able to violate the very same statutes without penalty. Statutes, for the record, that didn't even apply to the homeless folks who were standing on the beach at that very same location. At that moment, I thought to myself, if this is how we are prioritizing the distribution of our law enforcement resources at a time when jail deaths are up, retail theft is out of control, and random acts of violence are happening daily, and the issues surrounding homelessness are making most public places unusable for children, well then, we need a new sheriff and a new approach to how we partner with the community. I didn't think at the time that I would be running for sheriff, but as the days passed and I watched as yet another sheriff left office early in a blatant attempt to pass the torch to his pre-selected successor, I realized the only way to ensure meaningful change is to be a part of it. And that's why I'm here tonight. I look forward to answering your questions and sharing my points of view. And when it's all said and done, if you share my philosophies and agree with my platform, well, then I hope you'll take the time to vote in this year's primaries and support my candidacy to be your next sheriff of San Diego County. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gunderson. Mr. Battle, are you?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
No matter who we are or what we look like, we each share the need to live, work, and play in a safe, secure community. A good sheriff should focus on addressing the needs of the community by proactively addressing crime while being careful to protect the innocent all the while, overtly defending and preserving the constitutional rights of all the way through that process. It takes excellent leadership to provide the highest quality law enforcement services the public both desires and deserves. Today, Americans are experiencing a growing problem. Higher rates of first-time violent crime are being exacerbated by higher and higher instances of repeat offenders. Simultaneously, we have an alarmingly growing problem both recruiting and retaining skilled law enforcement personnel. We've all seen the media coverage over the last few years blaming the police for causing violent confrontations with suspects. In too many cases, police are wrongfully blamed for using excessive or inappropriate levels of force when responding to deadly threats, even when the officers involved responded properly and appropriately to the law, their department's policies, and their departmental training. We oftentimes see videos of suspects failing to comply with loud repeated commands from officers to drop their weapons. Why then, in spite of the video evidence, do the media and so many soft politicians still mysteriously persist in leading with blaming and vilifying the police in the news? Why do they lobby for the early release of violent criminals from our jails and prisons? Too many go immediately out to victimize additional innocent persons. This continued practice of vilifying police and emptying the jails is untenable and unacceptable for communities desiring to live in safety, security, and tranquility.
Thank you, Mr. Battle. Ms. Martinez.
Hi, thank you so much to the League for having me tonight and having this forum. My name is Kelly Martinez. I'm running for sheriff. I've worked for the department for 37 years. I've risen through the ranks. I'm currently the undersheriff and have been for a little over a year. That's the COO of the organization. I run the day-to-day operations of the department. It's a $1.1 billion budget. We cover 4,200 square miles of unincorporated county. We provide public safety services to 9 contract cities, manage the jails, and security for the courthouses. I have 3 priorities as the undersheriff and as a sheriff. The number 1 priority is hiring. We don't have enough staff. We need to hire more. And that's no different than any other police agency or many employers in the nation. We also need to invest in our jails. I'm investing tens of millions of dollars in our jails and the infrastructure. And then lastly, public safety is a very high priority in this region and in the nation. As everyone sees, every day there's another shooting that's occurring. So those are my 3 priorities. I've got my priorities in place. I have the right leadership team and I have the right path forward. In addition to that, I've got a number of endorsements. I'm lucky to have been endorsed early by Senate Pro Tem Tony Adkins, Chairman Nathan Fletcher, Supervisor Nora Vargas, Mayor Todd Gloria, Mayor Mary Salas, as well as the Deputy Sheriff's Association, the rank and file of our department who support me and support our mission and our priorities going forward. So I thank you very much for this opportunity, and Kelly Martinez for sheriff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Mr. Myers.
Thank you. Thanks to the League for having us. My name is Dave Myers. I've served in law enforcement for 35 years in a number of leadership roles, with my highest rank retiring as a commander. I am a leader in the LGBT community. I've organized and advocated for wages for employees and their benefits and mentored deputies to value community policing as leaders themselves. My experiences best qualifies me to be the next sheriff of San Diego County. I know all too well that restoring competency and community trust to sheriff's leadership is essential to a safe and thriving San Diego County for all residents. I'm running for San Diego Sheriff because I believe now more than ever, it's time for a change, a renewed focus on core law enforcement competency and a demonstrated commitment to rebuilding the community's trust in law enforcement. I want to start out with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said, The arc of the moral universe is long, but bends towards justice. Today, that arc appears to have split into two lines. One line is sheriff's leadership, and the other line is the people that we are sworn to serve and protect here in San Diego County. And those two lines are arcing away from each other at an increasing rate. What's driving these divergence are jail death after jail death, incident by incident, video by video, and yet we have a current sheriff's leadership who cling to outdated law enforcement practices and policies and don't acknowledge or address issues raised by our communities. And it doesn't have to be that way. We must speak truth about our shortcomings as law enforcement and fight to be better. Also understand that law enforcement is not the root cause. In our hardest hit neighborhoods, our deputies, people of enormous courage and integrity, are in those neighborhoods, are in those jails, risking their lives. As sheriff, I will work my hardest to ensure that as part of the solution. I'm Dave Myers, running for sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. I'll read Mr. Hemmerling's statement now. The upcoming election for sheriff is of vital importance to San Diego County. Crime is up on our streets and morale is down in our sheriff's department. There is an old saying that a new broom sweeps clean. I will bring real change and strong leadership as your new sheriff. The status quo is not good enough. Look at my record of public service and leadership, whether as a decorated San Diego police officer, Marine combat veteran, or for the past 6 years as chief criminal prosecutor in the city of San Diego. Too many people are dying in our jails. In Iraq, I was the Marine battalion commander for 4 jail compounds. Managing jail populations requires accountability, behavioral health assessments, and common sense diversion opportunities. Many people just need help, often with drug addiction. Effective policies can prevent needless deaths and help people to stay out of the criminal justice system. Leadership counts, victims matter. We need fresh new leadership for a real change in how we safeguard our neighborhoods, run our jails, treat victims of crime, and protect personal liberty, including the individual right to keep and bear arms. I have been endorsed by the California Republican Party, the Republican Party of San Diego County, former Mayor Kevin Faulconer, retired Police Chief Shelley Zimmerman, Councilman Chris Cate, Mayors Richard Bailey, Bill Wells, John Minto, and the San Diego Department City Attorneys Association, and the San Diego Asian Americans for Equality. For more information, please visit my website. Please vote for John Hemmerling for sheriff on June 7th. Your support is essential so I may provide the fresh new leadership, transparency, and accountability that we need to restore law and order and keep our community safe. Okay, we're going to go to the questions now. Mr. Battle, this first question is, we'll start with you. I'm sure you've all read the audit that was recently done on the Sheriff's Department. Would you please tell us what you would do to address the concerns that were raised in that study?
Yes, first off, it would require putting together a jail investigation team similar to the one I participated in back in 1992. We picked members from every one of the facilities and put together a team and went facility by facility from top to bottom through each and every one, preparing reports and recommendations for improving conditions. I think we can use the very same process to look into the actual state of the Detentions Bureau using that model. Following that, the solutions become obvious once you use the process to outline and define what the problems are.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gunderson?
Thank you. Great question. You know, I think you could look at changing the policies and maybe changing regulations, but really what you have is a cultural problem. When you read that report, what it boils down to is the employee A knew to do this, but chose not to do that. And that goes with sworn and non-sworn and with the medical staff. And whether that's because they become complacent or they haven't been given the proper resources or because they were trained and then apathy set in, I really don't know. But I think you can use that report as a basis for going in and working with the employees to get a better understanding of exactly why it's not working. What is it that we're not providing them that's making them choose to just simply disregard what they know is the right thing to do? And you begin with that, and then you move towards a shift of responsibility. And informing the employees that, okay, we've met with you, we understand your issues, we're going to give you the resources, and now we're going to hold you accountable for doing the job you're supposed to do.
Thank you, Mr. Gunderson. Ms. Martinez.
Yes, thank you. I actually worked with the auditors when they came to San Diego County, worked with them as they did their audit of our jails. I absolutely embrace and the recommendations, and we've been moving forward on those recommendations. We've committed $30 million for renovations at the George Bailey Detention Facility, which is much needed repairs. I'm investing $12 to $16 million on a new wireless upgrades to all of our jail systems that will connect all of our healthcare systems so doctors can talk to each other, nurses can talk to doctors. We've started implementing the body-worn camera program, which will show us real time or that afternoon what has happened in the jail setting. We'll have a better record of what's going on. It's helping already to de-escalate situations in our jail. There are numerous things we're doing. We're implementing medical and mental health screenings for everyone at intake. Just a whole lot of different things. The medically assisted treatment program, we're heavily investing in our jails, and we're moving forward with all those plans now.
Thank you. Mr. Myers.
Yeah, so just day before yesterday, number 210 died in custody with very little information about it. There was a use of force that occurred, and we still don't know what happened. I think that the Joint Legislative Audit Report, followed up by the CLERB report, are a look back at the historic pattern and practice of neglect which has taken place. And when someone says they're going to use it as a roadmap, clearly they've been lost and didn't know which direction to go in the first place. Right now, we really, as a community, need to reevaluate who is in custody and why, and what is the care of individuals who are in the custody of the sheriff. If right now you're just figuring out you need mental health practitioners to interview those entering custody, then there is something significantly wrong, and what we're doing is significantly wrong. Data is key to trying to fix the rate of deaths in the San Diego County Jail, and I'm committed to doing that.
Thank you very much. Another question that came in is, how will you improve community trust of the Sheriff's Department, particularly of minority communities? And we'll start with Mr. Gunderson.
Thank you, Don. I think clearly that's a responsibility of the sheriff to get out there with his folks and to work with the community-based organizations. And when I say work with, I mean truly listen to what it is they've been experiencing and listen to their suggestions for improvements. And then work with CLERB and other organizations to establish a process where it's clearly transparent, where you're taking those recommendations and those suggestions and you're putting them into a process that the entire public can see. And it shows the improvement, where we started, where we're going to be moving, where we're going to. And you've got to get the employee buy-in in order to make that happen. And so it really has to start with the line level. The sheriff's got to be out there spearheading that organization because you lead from the front. But the line level really has to buy in, because those are the folks who are providing the daily interactions with the public, who are really going to be the backbone of any movement that you try to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Myers?
Yes, absolutely. The key is showing up and listening. When in law enforcement, bad things happen by law enforcement, the chief of this organization, the sheriff, must stand up and meet with these community members and talk about what happened to create solutions to improve things going forward. When we had a member of the transgender community beaten up who was in the wrong jail, we had 0 comments from sheriff's leadership. The transgender community, that creates mistrust within the community. When you have a member of the community suffering mental health and they die in custody, and sheriff's leadership refuses to meet with them, to talk about what happened, to make improvements, that creates mistrust in communities. The sheriff must engage communities even when things are going good, to show up at community events even when it may be uncomfortable.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez?
Yeah, thank you. I'm constantly in meetings with community members over all types of issues. I've increased transparency on our department. We have more information available to the public now than ever before. We release body-worn camera footage of incidents within 7 days. My captains, lieutenants, everyone at every level in our organization is accountable for public and community forums. I hired a community inclusion director in 2018. We've never had a position like that. She's been absolutely engaged with our community, started the Spanish Academy, Citizens Academy, as well as a number of other initiatives. We have dozens of community events every week. I've never seen such a robust community engagement on our department. I'm very proud of the work that we're doing with our communities.
Thank you. Mr. Battle?
Thank you. It's probably not a well-known fact, but first line supervisors in the military, sergeants, chief petty officers are the most important rank when it comes to making sure that the product gets to the street. First level supervision is responsible for providing for the line staff the knowledge and the tools that they need to accomplish their jobs and to accomplish their missions. Getting the sergeants on board with doing things properly is probably the best way to get the patrol deputies and the folks who interact with the public on the same page. So it would be my idea to have regular meetings with all of the sergeants on the sheriff's department so that they could be on the same page and they would not be intimidated by the fact that one station does things one way while another does things another. With buy-in from the sheriff, they should have no problem sharing that information.
Thank you. Also regarding distrust among the community, do you believe there should be some type of citizen oversight of the sheriff department, including deputy discipline? And if so, what kind would you advocate for? Mr. Gunderson?
Thank you. Yes, actually, I believe strongly in citizen oversight, and I would advocate for a community oversight board that has the power to do investigations and to do subpoenas to truly understand what it is that's happened in each incident and what's going on in the organization. And they can then partner with the sheriff in recommending discipline. I don't think that a community board should have the right to implement discipline, because I think that that takes the experience and the understanding of somebody who's done the job and worked their way up. But I think they should have significant input as to what the perception is from the public's perspective of what occurred and what should occur in the future. Yeah, I think that about sums it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez?
Yeah, hi, thank you. We currently have the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board that has oversight over our sworn staff. I would like to have them also have some oversight over our medical staff in the jails. We work very well with the clerk board. We listen to their recommendations. We have a full-time unit that is assigned as liaisons to the clerk board. We're told all the time that we have a better relationship with our clerk board than many other agencies have in the country. In addition to that, I signed an MOU just a few weeks ago to allow a member of the clerk board to come to all in custody death scenes and use of force or that result in death or officer involved shooting scenes. So I think we're already doing a great job with that. I respect the board, I respect their recommendations, and we consider them all seriously. And we work very hard to work with that oversight board.
Thank you. Mr. Myers?
Yeah, thank you. 30 years ago, the citizens of San Diego County voted in the County Law Enforcement Review Board, which currently only has authority over sworn personnel in the Sheriff's Department and the Probation Department. I would advocate that the CLRB has citizen oversight over every employee in the San Diego County Sheriff's Department, not just some medical personnel, because there are significant issues in which I feel that community oversight is significantly important when it comes to the running of a large sheriff's department and oversight. The responsibilities for the oversight should be increased, not just use of force incidents or shootings or jail deaths. There should be the authority to do pattern and practice investigations, to have historical data submitted to CLRB. CLRB does have subpoena powers that so far as it's not used. We also need to expand oversight of district attorney investigators who are peace officers in the county of San Diego.
Thank you. Mr. Battle?
Thank you. Yes, well, CLRB does do its function, and it does what it needs to do in order to look into deputy involved shootings and deputy involved uses of force. Where the rubber meets the road, though, is what are the rules, what are the laws, and what are the employees' rights? The Internal Affairs Unit is going to investigate things, and they're going to come up with findings that are based on the law, on policies and procedures, and on training. There isn't really an avenue for disciplining someone because the attitude of a particular individual or group varies from what the practices and the law allow for law enforcement to accomplish. So there's a balancing act there. I think we have CLERB, we have oversight. I don't see us needing anything additional to that.
Thank you. This questioner believes the Sheriff's Department rules allow verbal complaints of a minor nature to be disregarded. Do you believe this should be changed, and how would you change it? Mr. Myers?
So I believe all complaints should take a formal process, whether that's a field supervisor or somebody in the field can handle it. Currently, the sheriff's policy is complaints are encouraged to be handled at the lowest level possible. I don't think that provides the proper data to determine the quality of service that law enforcement is providing to the community. So I think there should be a formal process in which complaints are received. They can be resolved at the lowest level possible. And the documentation that is what occurred is, I think, vital. We've seen recently Deputy Richard Fisher sexually assaulted upwards of 20 women while on duty. Several of them complained, and they claimed that to have filed complaints, but they were handled at the lowest level possible and there was no documentation.
Thank you. Mr. Battle?
Yes, well, handling complaints is something that needs to be addressed and it needs to be formalized. It was the practice of first level supervision to listen to complaints and to explain to callers or people who came into the front counter what it was that they thought that they were mistreated about was actually something that was perfectly lawful under the policies. And oftentimes all it took was an explanation as to what the policies are and what the deputy was actually trying to accomplish to satisfy the person, and we could send them on their way. Those are the kinds of minor things I think that the question is presuming, not questions about I was fondled or I was groped. Those are obviously going to require a formal investigation, and that those absolutely should be documented. But little things like I was stopped for making a turn in my vehicle, and I don't know why that happened. Those are minor things that a supervisor can handle.
Thank you. Mr. Gunderson?
Yes, thank you. I think all complaints should be documented and tracked. I don't know how you achieve true transparency without doing that, because you're missing out on the data of complaints that are received, how they were investigated, and then how they were resolved. And I think that's important, not just for the community, but also for the employees to understand the entire process and what's important in either proving or disproving a complaint when it's received. I also think that it helps to avoid mistakes like that were made in the Fisher case. You know, you start taking those complaints, and if you're not documenting them and they're not going into a system that's going to flag, hey, this deputy is getting an inordinate amount of complaints, perhaps we should look a little closer at what's happening over here, and are they doing things correctly or are they not? So every complaint should be documented in a centralized system so that we can flag folks who are doing things incorrectly, and so that we can show to the public that we're investigating everything, that we take it seriously.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And I think it's more a question of the nature of the complaint than a verbal complaint. By saying verbal complaint, it sounds like it's a complaint regarding something of a minimal nature, but a verbal complaint could certainly be something serious, like a deputy's behaving inappropriately or doing something that's illegal or unlawful. So I think it's the nature of the complaint, the type of complaint. We do have a very formal system regarding complaints and how supervisors handle them. One thing that's been really helpful for us in determining what happened are the body-worn cameras. We're able to very quickly, sometimes with a deputy's interaction, look at the body-worn camera footage and tell whether the complaint is valid or not valid. And oftentimes we will show the complainant the body-worn camera footage, and sometimes we've even been able to dispel that the incident actually occurred. But I think less so about a verbal complaint than the nature of the complaint and the type of complaint it is, and whether we need to document it or how we document that or investigate it is what's important.
Thank you. Going back to the study and the mortality rate currently addressed in the UT article that a lot of people have read about, what would you do to address the mortality rate? What specific things do you think need to be done in the jails to prevent these deaths? Mr. Battle?
Well, again, we require an assessment. We need to take a look at what's actually happening. It's one thing to allege certain ratios and certain percentages in comparing one department against another. As I recall, there were 4 different sheriff's departments, detentions bureaus that were compared, but they weren't necessarily apples to apples. San Diego transits a lot more people than the other 3 that were contrasted against, and the daily population rates seem to be higher. Plus, they didn't mention anything about the COVID deaths that certainly the sheriff's department wouldn't have anything to do with preventing. So again, it would take a jail inspection team to go through facility by facility and look at every one of the medical units and see what their practices and procedures are, and take it from that. After making that assessment, then you can make an intelligent recommendation on how to fix it.
Thank you. Mr. Myers?
Yeah, I'd start with using the sheriff's budget. Who are we booking into jail and why? If you have underlying misdemeanor charges, nonviolent, drug dependency type issues, if we are now in the county of San Diego for the first time, and I applaud our board of supervisors for pushing for these crisis intervention centers and our mobile crisis response teams. It doesn't mean we're not going to hold people accountable. It just means, is the jail the right place for it? Currently, there are very few structures, very few healthcare or fixes within our current jail system for long-term drug dependent individuals, despite what you're hearing. The studies after study after 4 studies about jail deaths, which laid out a historic pattern and practice of inmate deaths. If you're actually providing mental and long-term drug dependency care, you're not going to have those rates of deaths in custody. We need to address those and really figure out who belongs in jail and who doesn't.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez?
Yes, thank you. There are a number of things. We know what's wrong with our system. We know what we need to fix. We need more healthcare workers. We're actively working to hire those healthcare workers. We need a contract that coordinates and provides training and policies and hiring for our contracted healthcare workers, our psychiatrists, psychologists, the doctors, the x-ray technicians and dentists, which is, we're about to sign that contract and get that moving forward. We need a county hospital in San Diego County. We don't currently have that, so that people who are in our custody who need medical help have a place, a hospital to go to. That's seamless right now. We don't have a great system for that. We need more connectivity to community healthcare records, which is something we're striving towards with the wireless system upgrades and our technology upgrades. We know what we need to do. We're moving forward with that, and we've got our priorities in place.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with Mr. Gunderson. Do you support ending sorry.
That's right. Would you mind if I answer that last question?
Oh, you didn't answer that one? Sorry.
No, that's
Go
all
right
right.
ahead. I
Thank
probably
you.
checked you off too soon.
That's all right. So first and foremost, I think it's important to remember that everyone deserves to be safe while they're in the jails. And that's particularly true for pre-sentenced inmates. And so the first thing that I would do is ensure immediate access to medical care. And you have to change the culture in order to do that, where the employees view the inmates as people, right? True people, whether they're pre-sentence or post-sentence. First and foremost, they're people. And we need to provide them with the services that they need, even though maybe some of them are just playing the game and they don't need any services, but we still have to take them at their word and investigate that before we just simply dismiss them. And then I would move towards ensuring that we're doing true and useful checks, hourly checks, to make sure that people are still safe while they're in custody, while they're in their cells, even in the middle of the nights, to ensure that they're still alive and that they're not in need of medical services. I think that's the first 2 steps that you would take, and then you move down the line to continue to improve the services overall. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start with you, Mr. Gunderson.
Okay.
Do you support ending transfers and notifications to ICE? And if so, how would you achieve that goal?
Well, I think you have to support ending the transfers, because the people of the state of California in 2018, via the Truth Act, that's what they voted for, right? That we would no longer hold folks past their detention times for their local crimes in order to transfer them to the federal authorities. I don't necessarily support ending notifications, though. I think that we we swear an oath to defend all of and support all of the laws of the nation, federal, state, and local. And so while I don't think deputies should be charged with enforcing immigration laws, I think that it's important for us to work with our partners. And if the federal authorities have flagged folks as dangerous and folks who need to be removed from the country because of crimes that they've committed, then I think it's incumbent upon us to make the notifications and then let the federal authorities work as they would. And if they're there when we release them from local custody, as is required by the Truth Act, then great. I think that's how that should work.
Thank you. Mr. Battle?
Yes, thank you. Well, cooperating with ICE is definitely necessary to the extent that you have to operate within what the parameters are. It is absolutely important to turn over people who have been flagged by ICE. They have a reason for why they were flagged. They're predating on our citizens. So to the extent that crime can be canceled and citizens are safer for it, it's absolutely essential that the local sheriff's department cooperates in any way that they can legally with ICE.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez?
Yes, thank you. Currently, we follow the law related to ICE detainers and releasing people to the custody of ICE based on federal detainer warrants and things like that. Also, there are about 800 charges where we make notifications to ICE pursuant to state law. I think that we follow the law. If the legislature or if laws are passed that change that, then we'll change our practice.
Thank you. Mr. Myers?
Yeah, I've always been curious about this. I don't see, and nobody has been able to provide to me that, and the narrative is you have to cooperate with ICE and turn these individuals over to ICE without a federal judge's signature on a warrant because it creates safer communities. I have never seen any data which suggests it creates safer communities. Matter of fact, I've seen data and anecdotal information that it creates unsafe communities, because what you have, especially in San Diego County, with our growing Latinx population, is you have individuals who then will not report crimes. They may be victims and not report crimes. They will not be witnesses to crimes. And you have this, you're creating this mistrust. If a federal magistrate says, yes, turn over this person in a warrant, absolutely. Otherwise, there's no value. Matter of fact, it makes communities unsafe by cooperating with ICE.
Thank you. A sort of related question. We'll start with Mr. Battle. Would you prevent the Sheriff Department resources from being shared with the Department of Homeland Security agencies through joint task forces?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Depends on what they're doing. If they're asking the sheriff to help them violate with overreach the rights of the citizens of San Diego County, it would be on a case-by-case basis. I would not be inclined to help outsiders violate the rights of the constituents here in the county.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez?
Yes, thank you. I believe in working in a task force environment in San Diego County. That's what makes us safe. We have about 60 miles of a border that we share with Mexico, where there's a lot of cross-border organized criminal activity, including drug smuggling, human trafficking, a lot of victimization, robberies, things that occur. We work collaboratively with our federal partners on enforcing state law. We do not enforce immigration law or support or do anything to support their immigration efforts. That's a federal responsibility, not the local sheriffs. But I do think to make San Diego community safer, we need to work with our federal partners to minimize that cross-border crime and cross-border violence.
Thank you. Mr. Gunderson?
Yes, thank you. I think it's crucial that we share as much information as possible. I think if you look at failures in history, like the 9/11 Commission report, for example, the largest failure was the failure to share information among law enforcement agencies, and that information could have prevented those tragedies and I think other tragedies as well. And particularly when it comes to Homeland Security, one of their primary focuses is preventing or identifying human trafficking. And I don't think there could really be a greater priority that law enforcement should be striving to achieve in a collaborative fashion. So I would share as much information as possible. And I think, like my fellow candidates, I don't think the Sheriff's Department should be focusing on immigration, but we shouldn't be withholding information that allows other law enforcement partners to do their jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Myers.
Yeah, I'm very proud of the fact that I was the sheriff's commander that started a border crime suppression team several years ago, which is still in effect today and coordinates with DHS and DOJ. I'm very proud of the fact that I brought millions and millions of dollars through federal grants through the Stone Garden program to a community that is along an international border and international waters, not only with our agency, other state and local agencies, collaborating with other counties, but other federal agencies. And I was the one that wrote into the federal grant that the San Diego Sheriff's Department would not enforce any immigration laws. It was the first of its kind in the nation. We are still very effective in working and sharing information, but I think where the rub is with these federal agencies, the rub is we need to be transparent as much as possible with the community, with the public about what information are in our systems and what's being shared and when. It doesn't mean we are going to compromise any investigations, but be open and transparent.
Thank you. Let's start the next question with Ms. Martinez. The questioner feels there is bias in the Sheriff's Department. What specific steps would you take to address either explicit or implicit bias? Do you feel more anti-bias training is necessary?
Thank you for that question. I've initiated a lot of anti-bias training. We have it all the time posted on our website, and also for our employees to work with. We have conversations continuously. I encourage all of our staff to report anything that they see, hear, or understand to be biased of another employee or their peers or supervisors. It's always difficult when people feel through perception that they can't report or that there will be some sort of retaliation. It's difficult to navigate that and to impress upon people that there won't be any retaliation. The only way that you get through that is by example. And I think I lead by example in that area, and I'll continue to do that.
Mr. Battle?
Yes, thank you. Well, that's pretty much a generic allegation. Those are issues that get handled routinely at the sergeant's level, and hopefully they get resolved at the sergeant's level. Very, very few times do they ever get sent up the chain of command to be dealt with in other ways. Once again, it's the first level supervision that has to be tasked with maintaining the decorum, getting the word out to the troops, and making sure that people are talking about things that they should be talking about at briefings and lineups, and that the attitudes and the personalities of those at the table aren't denigrated by others at the briefings. So once again, first level supervision has a large role in changing the dynamics on a department.
Thank you. Mr. Myers?
First off, there's nothing generic about the 4 separate studies on the sheriff's data on the racial profiling data. There's nothing generic about the fact that each study confirmed that our Latinx, our African American, our LGBTQ, and Native American populations in San Diego County are over-policed, more force used on them, and less contraband found. I can also guarantee you that I will not go to an anti-vaxxer rally to recruit deputy sheriffs. I think we have to start with who we hire, why we hire them, and I think we need to be reflective of the communities that we are policing. We have to not only have basic academy training on bias, anti-bias, cultural competency, but it must be ongoing. We must continue to have the conversation starting at the highest level in this department.
Thank you. Mr. Gunderson?
Thank you. Yeah, I think implicit bias is present in all segments of our society. And I think that education is the key so that people understand what biases they may have and what biases other folks may have. When it comes to explicit bias, I don't think that's reasonable in any way. I think that people should be free to report explicit bias. And it kind of speaks to an earlier question that we had about complaints in general and why we should be tracking every complaint that comes in so that we can identify when people have maybe an inordinate amount of complaints related to bias and take a closer look at that and see if that's actually occurring. But both inside and outside the agency, explicit bias shouldn't be allowed in any form, and we should investigate that thoroughly. And people should feel free to report that and know that they're going to be protected from any form of retaliation.
Thank you. Moving on to some questions, other questions. Can you recommend, we'll start with Mr. Myers. Can you recommend any safe solutions for the houseless community? Do you support criminalizing the houseless or homeless? Mr. Myers.
So I do not support criminalizing the unsheltered community members. I also do not support the fact that currently the jail system is being used as a displacement and or temporary housing for the unsheltered. So we've seen within a lot of our local municipalities, ordinances created to criminalize the unsheltered. Now, I would look to those governmental agencies to create the solutions. I think law enforcement has a role, not a major role, in creating solutions for the unsheltered. There are some that law enforcement needs to address, yes, but there are so many more that we do not need to criminalize it. We need to encourage our governmental agencies to build housing first, wraparound services. There are so many people that are unsheltered, that do have jobs, that just can't afford to live in San Diego County, that may be staying in the cars, but jail's not the answer.
Thank you. Mr. Gunderson?
Thank you. I think we have a moral and ethical obligation to provide shelter to everybody in society. But I think we also have to understand that there are segments of the houseless population that will never accept our services. And we've proven that through experience. And so I think what I would do as sheriff is work collaboratively with government and state and local agencies. And ideally what I like to do is create an area outside of currently designed neighborhoods in more of a rural area where we can build shelters for folks who won't accept other services, not folks who have fallen into houselessness and just need our help for a little while to regain their footing and get into a hotel and then move on to more permanent housing, but folks who have continually denied offering of services. We create another area where we can say, okay, that's fine. You want to be homeless in San Diego County, that's okay, but you can only be homeless over here. And then we can work to say, okay, you can no longer pitch a tent in the parks and the beaches and make places untenable and usable for children.
Thank you. Mr. Battle?
Well, this is a really long lasting problem. I first encountered this in 1972 as a new police officer. Every call that you would go to where people are complaining about some homeless person here or there, well, you try to connect them with some kind of a resource to get them off the street. But as was just mentioned, there's a surprisingly large number of persons who prefer that lifestyle. So even when you took them and drove them to a facility and got them admitted into it, the next week they'd be right back out being homeless in the same area. They just preferred it to living the way that the rest of us do. And that's not their fault, but I don't see how the sheriff's department would have any way of changing that attitude in those people.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez?
Thank you. In 2018, I created our Homeless Assistance Resource Team, which works collaboratively with non-governmental agencies and resource providers, and they've worked very hard in our unincorporated jurisdictions to work with the homeless population to find them services for those who want them. They've housed hundreds of people. The problem that each of the candidates have already touched on is that some segments of that population do not want to take advantage of those resources. And we do have a growing number of people who are living in trailers and mobile homes and motor homes parked along roadsides because they can't afford housing in San Diego County. So there's a lot of government resources, a lot of government initiative right now to develop programs. And I have a lot of confidence that a lot of the elected officials in this county are working towards those solutions. The Sheriff's Department's here to support that. However, homelessness is not a criminal activity. And so we act in a supporting role.
Thank you. We'll start the next question with Mr. Gunderson. Recently, the sheriff's deputies served an eviction notice on a mentally ill woman that ended in her death. The questioner believes they entered with force without a warrant. even knowing she had mental health problems. What would you do to ensure this doesn't happen again?
Well, that's a tragic situation. You know, it's difficult when we task folks, deputies, with doing a job without giving them all the proper resources. And I think we're coming to see that in our society, that we've often tasked law enforcement with responding to calls of people with mental crisis who don't respond normally. And we don't equip the deputies or the law enforcement officers with the training and with the resources that they need to be able to deal with those situations in a way that doesn't result in injury or death. And so I think the first thing that I would do is continue with expanding the program where you pair mental clinicians with both law enforcement officers and with paramedics from fire departments to go out and first make contact with folks like that. If we know in advance that somebody that's going to be evicted has mental problems, we should be contacting them long before the day of eviction and connecting them with services so that when the day of eviction comes, it's not a time to use force. And if it is time to use force, we should walk away and try another day.
Thank you. Mr. Battle?
Yes, thank you. Well, assuming that the deputies entered forcibly without a warrant, assumes facts that really aren't in evidence. I think from my understanding, the deputies were there lawfully, and the situation just cascaded and evolved into a situation where they had to defend themselves. At the point where you have to use deadly force to defend yourself from an imminent attack, you do what you need to do. So I don't know that these deputies responded illegally into this woman's apartment. From what I have seen, from what I have read, they were there lawfully, and she just lost it at some point in the contact. You can't plan for people losing it once you're legally in someone's apartment. The fact that they go off on you requires that you take defensive action. I think that's what happened in this case.
Thank you. Mr. Myers?
Her name is Dr. Yan Lee. She was in her own apartment, and the presence of the deputy sheriff was simply to serve an eviction notice, in which he did on video. He actually stepped in and handed it to her. Service is complete. Very simply walk away. Just because she was holding a knife at her side, she never advanced at her. You should be very concerned about it as a deputy sheriff, and you have the luxury of backing up and backing out. She closed the door. 45 minutes later, yes, they did force entry. My over 3.5 decades of law enforcement, that was a very tragic incident in which an officer got stabbed and a woman lost her life, and it should have never happened. Law enforcement must rethink rushing into situations and using outside resources, mental health professionals, when addressing a lot of things in our communities today.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez?
Yeah, thank you for the question. This was an absolutely tragic and horrible incident. And I think what you do when things happen is you look at them, you review them, you critically assess what happened, what went wrong, where the deficiencies were, if they were in training, if they were in the individuals that were on scene. If you find fault in any of those things, if you believe that there needs to be an internal investigation, that's what you do. But you just have to really understand, what the people on scene were doing, what they were thinking, whether there were deficiencies in their training or their experience or leadership, and you go from there.
Thank you. We had a question about, speaking of the officers' video cameras. Let's start with Mr. Battle. Do you believe the sheriff's deputies should always have their video cameras on, or should it be at their discretion of when they turn them on?
Well, thank you for the question. Yeah, it wouldn't be very efficacious if you gave them the option to turn them on or turn them off, because obviously if you had that option, then if you were going to do something nefarious, you wouldn't turn it on. At least I wouldn't. So I would imagine that those who were going to be doing things that they didn't want recorded would not turn them on. So it is really important that if you're going to have BWCs, it needs to be mandatory that they be on whenever you make contact with the public.
Thank you. Mr. Myers?
Yeah, I'm very proud of the fact that as a commander on the sheriff's office, I was tasked with bringing body-worn cameras to the San Diego Sheriff's Department, including in 2015, my recommendation to implement them in the jails. Sheriff's leadership at the time only implemented them in the field on a very small trial by trial basis. I do believe, and I also was the one that wrote the policy, that the body worn cameras need to be turned on, including audio. I've noticed recently on a lot of the audio that it's turned off and turned back on sometimes. I understand the audio needing to be turned off during discussions, tactical discussions, but when a situation goes down, there should be uninterrupted audio and video to document what's happening for the protection of the deputies and assurance to the citizens.
Thank you. Mr. Gunderson?
Yes, thank you. I think body worn cameras should be on anytime a deputy is going to get out of a car or leave a building to contact a member of the public. And the way the body worn cameras generally work is they're always recording, right? Just not audio, but they're recording constantly. And so then when the deputy goes to activate it, you capture the 30 minutes of video prior to, and then you capture the audio from the time that they actually activated. And that's crucial because it helps to, as was mentioned earlier in this forum, it really helps to mitigate complaints, right? And to resolve them much more quickly, which is great for the public and it's great for the deputies. And I think the more information that we have, the better. I wouldn't support having them on just all the time while deputies are driving around. I think that's a pretty big invasion of privacy. And I also think that it would be difficult from a management and storage perspective and also from a review perspective. But I do support that anytime that there's contact with the public, yes, I think they should be on. I don't think there's any reason that you wouldn't have them on.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez?
Yeah, thank you. We have a very well-written policy with the body worn cameras when they need to be turned on. And when they aren't turned on, we don't turn them on. For instance, when deputies are having private conversations by themselves and they're not, interacting with the public. However, they are required to turn them on before each incident, before they get to calls, a whole host of circumstances. The same with our body worn camera program in the jail, which, as you can imagine, they are interacting with individuals who are in our custody all the time, all day long. So we have thousands of hours of footage from those interactions. So they are monitored and audited by our supervisors and our lieutenants randomly and continuously, and also in a very systematic way so that we can make sure that the policies are being followed. So I don't think they should be turned on 100% of the time, but certainly they should follow our policy.
Thank you. We'll start this question with Mr. Myers. What surveillance tools, if any, are helpful to sheriff's deputies, and who should determine how and when they should be used? And how would you balance the demands of law enforcement against the rights of the privacy of the community?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Transparency, transparency, transparency. We need to have policies that talk about transparency on the equipment that we're using. If we're using surveillance cameras in an undercover investigation somewhere, we're not going to tell the bad guys where the cameras are. That doesn't make sense. I brought license plate readers to the department, and the importance and value in criminal investigations for license plate readers is critical to safe and secure communities. But then again, how is that information shared? Where is it stored? Who has access to it? How do we audit the information that we collect from these surveillance tools? Drones, the ones that we're using now, where is that information stored? How is it stored? How often do we evaluate it? I think that is critical in letting the public know how that is being done, not necessarily where some of law enforcement's surveillance equipment is.
Thank you. Mr. Gunderson?
Thank you. I think in a digital age, it's almost like everything's surveillance, right? The use of your phone and drones and license plate readers and you name it. And I think the key is that you have a public process, right? And because all societies in all communities, they have different tolerances for what they're willing to accept with regard to surveillance. And so you have to have an open process in the beginning and say, these are the technologies available to us now. This is what we'd like to use, and receive the endpoint to see if that's what the community expects, if that's what they're willing to have for surveillance in San Diego County. And then I think you need, with the advancements of technology so quickly, you need to update that on at least an annual basis. have a community forum every year and say, okay, these are the technologies we've been using. This is how we've been using them with regard to the transparency aspect. And then ask if it's okay if we continue using these moving forward in that same manner, and if we add new technologies to it.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez?
Yeah, hi, thank you. The privacy rights of citizens and individuals are absolutely paramount, and we need to protect those at all costs and also be transparent about the equipment we have and how we're using it. A few years ago, I think 3 years ago now, in the city of Lemon Grove, we rolled out Safe Lemon Grove, which is a system of cameras that are put in public places. And we had a number of community forums. We met with the city council, with mayor. We wanted to make sure that everyone in that community understood that these cameras were placed for their safety. They're very well documented that it's a camera that the sheriff's department has access to. They're not recorded. It's just real-time data, and it's cut down on crime in areas where the public did not feel safe. So that's just one example of how I approach using technology and surveillance systems with the public.
Thank you. Mr. Battle?
Yes, thank you. Well, being the 21st century, the technology is going to continue to evolve, and police are always going to take advantage of whatever the latest technology is, and rightfully so. The police would be getting behind the times if they weren't taking advantage of all the science that allows us to solve crimes more quickly and more efficiently. So to the extent that new technology comes out and the need for the public to know about it, there are ways that they could be made known. The sheriff's department has a web page. They could have a page dedicated to what are the current technologies and what are we using them for, and if you need to know, here it is. So full disclosure, but let's not take the tools away from the cops who are trying to cancel the crime.
Thank you. Start the next question with Ms. Martinez. What would you do to attract new staff and expand the staffing issues?
And we're doing a lot already. We're dedicating a lot of money to recruitment efforts. We're using social media. We're advertising at large events. We've got recruiting booths at every community forum that we attend. We are advertising, as I said, in all kinds of different places, word of mouth. Our best recruiters have always been our current employees. I opened a new employee orientation this week. We had about 40 professional staff that we had just hired on their first day with the department, and there was an absolute excitement and just a welcoming atmosphere. We're so happy to have new employees. So I think being the better workplace, we're not going to win the salary wars, but if we show that we have a good brand, that we have value, and that people respect our department and where we want to be, I think we'll have a good opportunity to hire and retain the most employees.
Thank you. Mr. Gunderson?
Thank you. This really all comes down to support. I think as a society, especially in California, we spent about the last decade disincentivizing becoming a law enforcement officer, right? First, we lengthen the age you have to work until you can retire. Then we cap the amount of money you can make in retirement. And then we had the legislature say, hey, yeah, we haven't equipped you to respond to calls of crisis, but when you do, if you do it wrong and somebody gets hurt, now you're subject to go into prison. And then you have politicians who are pandering to the minority subset that wants to defund the police, right? And so you've made the career not very attractive. And I think the first thing you need to do is work with the local politicians and elected officials and say, okay, hey, we need to come out publicly and say, we support law enforcement officers, and change the culture and the environment of the job, and then define exactly what is expected of law enforcement officers and say, we're going to stand behind you if you do the job the way that you're supposed to do, and we're going to make it attractive in terms of salary and benefits and time off, especially flexible time off.
Thank you. Mr. Myers?
I'm going to start with the pay and benefits. We've seen a deterioration, especially in the benefits within the San Diego County Sheriff's Department and the retirement system. I'm also going to work on the classifications of deputy sheriffs. Right now, you have 2 different classifications of deputy sheriff, but they could be working side by side, and one is earning more money than the other one. That is inherently unfair and has caused huge morale problems. Nobody wants to come and work here in large part because of that reason alone. I'm then going to go, well, I can guarantee you I'm not going to go to an anti-vaxxer rally and recruit, but I'm going to go to communities where individuals that we think are reflective of the community and talk about the benefits of law enforcement. I'll disagree with some of the candidates here on law enforcement is not attracted because of media or politicians. No, law enforcement is a great profession. It's a noble profession. I did 35 years in it. I'm running for sheriff again, coming out of retirement because I believe in it.
Thank you. Mr. Battle?
Yes, thank you. Well, for all of the reasons that the other candidates have already disclosed, the things that we can do about it at the department have to do with morale. Morale is the biggest thing that we can actually do something about. And it's true that word of mouth from employees is what generally gets other people interested in coming to the department. If you have low morale, what are the chances that your staff is going to tell other people, come work here, it really sucks? That's not going to happen. So if you want to increase that hand-to-hand, mouth-to-mouth reach out from current staff, you have to improve morale. How can you improve morale? Make them think that they're going to be treated fairly and equitably. That's the first step to improving morale.
Thank you. I have quite a few questions on gun violence. I'm going to just sort of combine them all. We'll start with Ms. Martinez. One is, how would you prevent gun violence, which is pretty general, but would you support this? Do you support the safe storage firearms? Do you support responsible gun ownership? And how might you hold the gun industry? Do you feel the gun industry should be held responsible and be held to account?
Yeah, well, I think the sheriff's role is really to work with public safety in our communities and reducing gun violence by solving violent crime and taking guns off the street from violent criminals that have them. The ghost guns have been one of our biggest issues in the last 2 years. Taking those off the streets has been hugely important. It's important, right now, a lot of the public doesn't feel safe, and more people are buying guns, purchasing guns, have gun ownership, applying for concealed weapons permits with the sheriff's department. And this goes down to a general feeling of not feeling safe. So we need our public to feel safe. And the way to do that is to make safe communities and reducing the guns in our communities and the gun violence that's occurring in our communities.
Thank you. Mr. Battle?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm not in favor of any extra gun grabbing measures. I've never experienced a situation where I drove up and found a gun was committing a crime in 50 years of being in law enforcement. There was always a human being attached to the weapon. So to try to police the world by taking weapons away from people who need them to defend themselves, because when seconds count, the police are minutes away. It's understandable that the citizenry has opted to buy huge numbers of firearms in the last 10 years. There's a reason for that. They don't feel secure because they can't rely on the fact, and government isn't responsible for protecting them. There is no law that says a police officer has to protect you unless they establish a special relationship with you by having first arrested you. At that point, the 8th Amendment requires that they take good care of you.
Thank you. Mr. Gunderson?
Thank you. Yeah, I strongly support responsible gun ownership. And I believe that it's incumbent upon a sheriff to work, as the other candidates have said, to take guns away from folks who shouldn't have guns, right? But to support the responsible citizens of our community who should be allowed to carry weapons. And it's somewhat of a balancing act, right? You devote your resources to, especially these days, to getting ghost guns off the street if at all possible. And you educate society, especially the responsible gun owners, on the importance of gun storage, right? A proper gun storage to avoid those accidents. But I think the resources of the sheriff's department would be best spent rooting out the felons who are in possession of weapons that shouldn't have weapons, and going after, much like how we used to strongly go after meth labs in the past and still do to some degree. I think now you have laboratories that are doing nothing but producing ghost guns, and we really need to focus on rooting those out and getting those off the street so that they don't fall into the wrong hands and then cause unfortunate deaths.
Thank you. Mr. Myers?
Yeah, I absolutely support sensible gun regulation. Right now, I have been to too many calls in my career where a kid has obtained a parent's firearm and used it and either shot themselves or a sibling. It's a very tragic event to attend. safe storage is a must. I think the sheriff would play a very big role in the education process of safe storage of firearms at home. In my career in law enforcement, I've many times have confiscated firearms from individuals that should not have them and should not purchase them. When it comes to ghost guns and the enforcement of ghost guns, they are parts that are being sold individually to individuals to make guns. So they're happening in the homes. I absolutely support the federal legislation to ensure that those that are buying the parts and pieces have to comply with all the same standards within California to purchase a fully functioning firearm.
Thank you. Okay, this is going to be our last question before we go to closing remarks. What is your position on the agreement that the police and sheriff agencies have to review each other's officer-involved deaths? Mr. Battle?
I'm sorry, did you say inter-office investigations of officer?
Yeah, the question was, what's your position on the agreement the police and sheriff agencies have agreed to review each other's officer-involved deaths?
Well, it makes sense from the standpoint that it gives you the appearance of transparency. For no other reason than that's a good reason to institute that. Everyone should feel more comfortable observing an investigation where one investigator is from the same department who is in agreement with one from another department. If 1 and 1 is 2, then that should lead others to be more comfortable with their outcomes.
Thank you. Mr. Gunderson?
Thank you. Yeah, I strongly support outside investigations. I think officer-involved deaths are obviously very critical incidents, and they get a lot of public exposure, as they should. And you want as high of a level of transparency as possible, but most importantly, you want a fair and balanced investigation, and one that's done without bias and without anything that might negatively affect or inordinately affect the way the investigation is done through personal relationships. And so I think it's good for the people that are involved, and it's good for the organization and for the community if another agency is the primary law enforcement agency that does the investigation on any officer involved death.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez? You're muted, or we're not hearing you. You might want to check your sound volume. While you do that, Mr. Myers, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the press conference that was held today by the chief and one of the candidates here is skirting the absolute issue of use of force deaths. I think it's a Band-Aid to, as we just talked about earlier, Dr. Yan Lee and the fact that she was shot to death. I have confidence in the 2 shootings investigated by my department that I was involved in, that they were fair and that they were transparent. I think what has happened over the years is there has been a complete deterioration in the trust in law enforcement for many different reasons. And right now the Band-Aid effect is, well, we'll have some other agency come in and do the investigation. Well, right now the FBI and the district attorney show up to all in custody or use of force in custody deaths and shooting incidents. Now, if that hasn't created trust in the community, you have a bigger problem on your hand, and this is not the solution to creating trust.
Thank you. I think Ms. Martinez is trying to come back in and fix her volume. Let's go ahead and start with closing statements, and when she comes back in, we'll let her answer that question. Mr. Myers, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, absolutely. So San Diego County voters face an important choice in choosing a new sheriff. County residents are justifiably outraged about the lethal status quo of the current leadership in the sheriff's department for preventable jail deaths. Dr. Yan Lee did not have to die, and a police officer did not have to be stabbed during the service of an eviction notice. De-escalation is not a 2-hour video. We need to be consistent and constant. I want to start with bringing badly needed changes to outdated policing policies and practice. Create a leadership team that is competent, diverse, and trustworthy. rebuild the trust between law enforcement and all communities in San Diego County. I will not recruit deputy sheriffs at an anti-vaxxer rally. We must be reflective of the communities we police. I say let's implement restorative justice approach to juvenile offenders to interrupt the school to prison pipeline. I want to establish a data-driven process to perform a comprehensive evaluation of our jails so that we can develop a better understanding of the root causes of the record number of jail deaths. I want to implement body-worn cameras for every deputy sheriff in the San Diego Sheriff's Department. Community involvement, I am running for San Diego County Sheriff because I believe law enforcement must re-engage in a real and meaningful way with all residents. I'm Dave Myers and I'm running for sheriff.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez, have you got your volume issue resolved? Not sure. Okay, Mr. Gunderson, do you want to give your closing remarks?
Oh, thank you, ma'am. Well, if you made it this far through the presentation, thank you for staying tuned and thank you for taking an interest in the future of our community. I'd like to thank the League for bringing us together and my fellow candidates for being willing to participate in this evening's forum. Law enforcement is a shared responsibility for all of us, and I envision a world where all community members will embrace law and order and believe in their duty to hold each other accountable and to partner with professional law enforcement officers to apprehend and bring to justice the predators among us. Because you see, no matter where you come from or what your socioeconomic status might be, we all want to feel safe in our communities, and we all should. But in order to achieve that, the laws of our nation must be upheld at all levels, with special focus on the quality of life crimes like residential burglaries and public indecency that so negatively affects the law-abiding members of our community, especially our children. If you agree with the views I've expressed tonight, then I hope that you will join me in an effort to make San Diego County the safest, most fair, and most welcoming community in the nation. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the evening with your loved ones. Thank you to my family and friends for their support, and vote for Gundo.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez? Apparently she's having trouble hearing us as well as speaking to us. Okay, Mr. Battle,
Yes,
you want to go ahead with your closing remarks?
thank you. One of the most crucial roles in any paramilitary organization is played by first-line supervision. First-line supervisors have or should have the best handle on who and what type of employee they have working for them. Therefore, input from first-line supervisors is critical in assessing the quantity and quality of an employee's work product for many different reasons. That input is invaluable to the appointing authority later, both when promoting and when considering for or against the need for major discipline, depending upon and whether or not favorable evidence of the employee's propensities to have historically been a team player who followed the rules are available. Where an employee was readily amenable to verbal corrections by supervision for small, minor, or other unwanted or unexpected acts or omissions, and when such work history is accurately provided by their supervisor, the fear of and the need for major discipline may be assuaged or taken off the table completely. On retention and hiring, to promote trust and thus maintain high morale, effective supervisors, managers, and leaders in any law enforcement entity must insist on preserving the highest moral and ethical integrity throughout all levels and all phases of the disciplinary process. As your candidate, I will hold both admin and staff accountable for knowing and for following all legal and departmental approved processes. The constitutional and due process rights of each and every member of this department need to be respected if morale and retention are to be improved. Doing the right things and doing things right is what your candidate has always and will always be about. No less will I expect from everyone on the team. Let's stop the bleeding. As your sheriff, I will involve first-line supervision department-wide in new and innovative ways, seeking to improve deputy morale. An effective leader finds a way and a process by which to correct problems. This vision, purpose, and focus is what this candidate offers you.
Thank you. I think Ms. Martinez is still attempting to come in. She is having network trouble. Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for attending this evening and asking such good questions. They were really to the point and on good topics. I want to make sure you all are registered to vote and that you've checked that your address is correct with sdvote.com. Remember, the county is now using the Voters' Choice Act, which allows you to vote by mail, drop box, or at the registrar's office. Every registered voter will have their ballot mailed to them on May 9th, so look for it. Also, please attend league events where we give in-depth information on all sides of critical issues affecting our communities at lwvsandiego.org. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of San Diego, North County, and the League of Women Voters of San Diego, I want to thank the candidates for running for office and attending our forum this evening. As a reminder, the views expressed are those of the candidates and not of either of our local leagues. Thank you again. You are here tonight because you're following the league motto. Don't just be a voter, be an informed voter. Thank you and good night. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.